He had once ordered the extermination of an entire gang without lifting a finger from the newspaper. He had once made a man kneel and beg before him without batting an eye. But that night, at 2:13 a.m., amidst a torrential downpour tearing through Blackwater, a voice uttering just 6 words accomplished what no enemy had done in 15 years. It made Cassian Vale freeze. And when the city's most dangerous man began to move for a stranger, all of Blackwater City shuddered. Which city are you watching from? Like and comment your city name below so I know how far this story has progressed. Watch to the end, because this is the kind of story where you won't be able to guess what happens next. The rain had been falling since midnight, and by 2 a.m. it had turned mean. It came down in sheets across Blackwater City, hammering the glass towers of the financial district, drowning the gutters of the port neighborhoods, running black and oily through the cracked streets of Ashridge Court, where nobody who had a choice ever stayed after dark. The kind of rain that made people feel like the sky itself was trying to push them underground. Cassian Vale barely noticed it. He sat behind the wide obsidian desk on the 41st floor of the Meridian Spire's private residential wing. Not in the official penthouse that appeared in real estate listings and architecture magazines, but in the floor above it, the one that didn't exist on any blueprint filed with the city. The room was dim. One lamp burned at the corner of the desk, throwing a narrow cone of amber light across the papers spread before him. Financial ledgers, transfer records, a 3-page summary of a problem that had developed in the southern docks over the past 72 hours, written in the careful shorthand of a man who had learned long ago never to write anything that could be read aloud in a courtroom. He had a glass of bourbon at his elbow, 2 fingers, untouched for the past hour. His reading glasses, which only 3 people in the world had ever seen him wear, sat on the end of his nose. He was 41 years old, and in certain lights and certain moods, you could almost forget what he was. Dark hair going silver at the temples, a face that had once been considered handsome before life carved something harder into the bones of it, a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong after being broken and healed without a doctor. His name moved through Blackwater City the way weather moved, quietly, inevitably, felt before it arrived. The phone on the desk was a matte black device with no manufacturer's logo and a number that existed in fewer than a dozen contacts across the entire world. It did not ring often. When it did, it was never good news. At 2:13 a.m., it rang. Cassian looked at it for a moment without moving. His eyes stayed on the ledger page. The phone rang a second time. He pulled off his glasses, folded them with one hand, and reached for the receiver. He said nothing. He never said anything first. The sound that came through the line stopped him cold. Breathing. Ragged, wet, desperate. The kind of breathing that came from a body that had been through something recent and terrible. Behind it, distant but unmistakable, a man's voice raised to a scream. Something heavy hit something else. A crack that sounded like wood or bone. And then a woman's gasp, sharp and involuntary, the kind your body produces before your brain can decide whether to make noise. Then her voice, barely above a whisper, fractured at the edges. "Can you come get me? Please?" 6 words. Cassian Vale had heard men beg for their lives. He had listened to grown men weep, watched them offer him everything they owned, their businesses, their family's safety, their own loyalty and perpetuity, just to get him to stop what was already in motion. He had felt none of it. Not because he was broken in the way people sometimes assumed, not because he lacked the capacity. He had learned, a very long time ago, and at considerable cost, that feeling things was a liability he couldn't afford to carry and still do what needed to be done. He felt this. It moved through him before he could stop it, something instinctive and immediate. The way a cold wind moves through an open door. Before you decide whether to close it, it's already inside. The call cut out. There was a cry, sharp and short, and then nothing. Static. Silence. Cassian held the phone against his ear for another 3 seconds, listening to emptiness. Then he set it down carefully on the desk. He looked at the bourbon. He looked at the ledger. He picked up the phone again and dialed a different number. Harlan picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had been watching a monitor somewhere and had seen the call come in. "I need a trace on the last incoming," Cassian said.
Give me the address. Already running. A pause. Keystrokes. Ashridge Court, 42 Whitmore Lane, apartment 3C. You want me to send a unit? Send 3. Another pause, shorter this time. You want me to come? No. Cassian was already moving. He had already pushed back from the desk, already stood, already crossed the room toward the closet where the coat hung. Stay on comms. And Harlan, yeah. Tell them not to touch anything until I'm there.
The SUVs moved through the rain-swept streets of Blackwater in a tight formation, black and silent, headlights cutting tunnels through the downpour. Cassian sat in the rear seat of the lead vehicle, with his hands resting loosely on his knees and his eyes on the window, watching the city blur past. The neighborhoods changed as they moved south, the glass and marble of the financial corridor giving way to the older, heavier architecture of the Port District, brick and iron and rusted fire escapes, streets that narrowed like throats. He did not think about why a stranger's voice had made him move this fast. He thought about logistics. He thought about the address, what he knew about Ashridge Court, which wasn't much, low-income residential, high turnover, the kind of block where neighbors had learned not to look at each other too carefully. He thought about what kind of trouble could find a woman alone at 2 a.m. and still have her reaching for a phone number that shouldn't exist. He didn't let himself think about the sound of her breathing. 42. Whitmore Lane was a 4-story building with a buzzer panel missing half its nameplates and a front entrance that didn't lock properly. Cassian's men had arrived 90 seconds ahead of him. 2 stood at the building entrance. 3 more were already on the stairwell. 1 was outside apartment 3C, and as Cassian came up the stairs 2 at a time, he could see from the set of the man's jaw that something was wrong inside. "What is it?" Cassian asked. "Still going," the man, Decker, broad-shouldered, 23 years working for Cassian and loyal, the way Stone was loyal, said without expression. "Guy's been at it for a few minutes. Doors standard hollow core. You want us to go in?" "I want you to step back." Decker moved. Cassian tried the knob, locked. He hit the door with his shoulder once, hard, and the frame split along the deadbolt housing and the door swung inward and he walked through it into the apartment. What he saw lasted 3 seconds, from the time he entered to the time it ended, but he would have been able to describe every detail of it for the rest of his life, because the mind holds certain things whether you want it to or not. The apartment was small and poorly lit, a kitchenette at one end and a living space at the other with almost nothing between them. A lamp had been knocked over. A chair was on its side. The television was still on, muted, throwing blue-white light across the wall in silent flickers. A man stood in the kitchenette, late 20s, built wide across the shoulders, wearing a gray t-shirt soaked dark with sweat. Royce Mercer, though Cassian wouldn't know his name for another 10 minutes. His face was contorted with the particular ugliness that lives in people who hit the one smaller than them because it's the only place they've ever felt large. And on the floor, with her back against the kitchen cabinets, and her arms crossed over her face, was the woman. She was young, not a girl, but young, mid-20s, dark hair matted against her cheek, wearing a dispatcher's uniform shirt with the sleeve torn at the shoulder. One eye was swelling shut. Her lower lip had been split. She was trying to make herself smaller, which is what the body does when it has learned that being small sometimes slows things down. Royce Mercer turned when the door came open. He made the mistake of reaching for the gun tucked in the back of his waistband. He never got his hand around it. What happened next was quick and controlled and completely without drama. Decker and 2 others were through the door before the weapon cleared the man's belt. By the time the gun hit the kitchen floor, Royce Mercer's face was against the countertop, and both his arms were pinned behind him at an angle that was not quite but almost structural damage, and he was making the sounds that people made at the threshold of that. Cassian didn't watch it. He was already crouching down in front of the woman on the floor. She flinched when he moved toward her. He expected that. He stopped moving and let her adjust to his presence, the way you stopped with a dog that had been hit too many times. Not out of gentleness exactly, but because understanding what fear does to a body was the first step to not making it worse. She lowered her arms by degrees. Her visible eye found his face and stayed there, and what he saw in it was not what he expected. He expected the blankness that came after shock. He expected absence.
Instead, she was completely present, completely alert, cataloging him the way someone did when they had learned through experience to assess threat quickly. She was looking at him the way he sometimes looked at rooms. "You called," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him for another moment. Her lip was bleeding steadily and she didn't seem to notice. Her hands were shaking at her sides, but her gaze was level. "I didn't know who else." She stopped, swallowed, started again. "The number. Someone gave it to me. Know if it was real." "It's real," Cassian said. He stood up.
He looked at her for a moment longer than he meant to, then looked at Decker, who was watching him from across the kitchen with an expression that said nothing, because Decker's expressions never said anything, which was one of the reasons he had lasted 23 years. "Get him out of here," Cassian said quietly. "Somewhere he can think about his choices." He shrugged off his coat without looking away from the woman on the floor. He held it out to her. She looked at it. She looked at him. She took it, and when she pulled it around her shoulders, he saw her hands shaking harder for just a moment. Not from fear this time, he thought, but from something else. The particular bodily reaction that came when the danger that had been holding you together suddenly stepped back. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Yes." She said it immediately, and it wasn't bravado. It was reflex, the kind of answer a person gave when they had learned that admitting weakness always cost them something. She pushed herself up from the floor, and to her credit, she made it to her feet without help, though she kept one hand on the cabinet behind her for a moment. Cassian did not offer his hand. He understood, without quite articulating it, that some people needed to stand under their own power right now, even more than they needed help doing it. "My name is Alara," she said. She said it like she needed to establish it, like it mattered that he know she had a name. "I know," Cassian said, which wasn't true, but it would be like that. In the SUV, she sat in the rear seat beside the window and watched the city move past in the rain. She had a paper cup of water from somewhere. Decker must have found it. And she held it in both hands without drinking from it. The coat was still around her shoulders. Cassian sat at the opposite end of the seat, giving her the full width of the bench between them, his forearms on his knees and his eyes forward. 3 blocks from Whitmore Lane, she said, without preamble. "Who are you? Does it matter right now?" A pause. "It's going to matter eventually." He looked at her then, just briefly, and found that she was looking back at him with the same careful assessment she'd used on the kitchen floor. The swelling eye was darkening. The cut lip had slowed. She looked like she had been through something ugly and had come out the other side of it still thinking. "Cassian Vale," he said. He watched her face, watched the recognition move through it. Not the theatrical kind, not the sudden intake of breath in widened eyes, but something quieter and more considered. She had heard the name. She knew what it meant, and she didn't look away from him, which told him something. "The Cassian Vale," she said. "There's only one." She looked out the window again. The harbor lights were coming up through the rain, streaking the glass in lines of gold and white. After a moment, she said, "I work dispatch, emergency services. Sometimes calls come in and I recognize voices before I know why. And when I called that number," she stopped. "I recognized your voice from somewhere. I don't know from where." Cassian said nothing. "That's not the part that scares me," she continued. "What's the part that scares you?" "The part that scares me is that calling you felt like the right thing to do." He didn't answer that. The convoy turned onto the harbor road, the water black and churning to their left, the lights of the estate coming up on the hillside ahead. Well, the estate was not subtle. That had never been the point. It sat on a promontory above the harbor. 3 acres behind iron gates and security systems that cost more per year than most people earned in a decade. Bulletproof glass throughout. Grounds monitored by both electronic sensors and human ones. The architecture was old Blackwater money, stone and dark timber, the kind of building that had been built to last through things, and had. Alara stood in the entrance hall and looked at all of it. The height of the ceilings, the controlled quiet of a place where everything had been arranged to project a particular kind of power. And her face did something complicated that Cassian noticed but couldn't quite name. A woman named Sylvie, who managed the household and asked no questions as a professional practice, showed Alara to a room on the 2nd floor. Cassian stood in the entrance hall after they went up the stairs, and Harlan, materialized from the corridor off the kitchen, the way Harlan always materialized, suddenly, without prelude, coffee mug in hand at 2:30 in the morning. "You want the brief now or in the morning?" Harlan asked. "Now. The boyfriend has priors, assault, possession, one charge that got dropped under circumstances I'm still looking at." Harlan's voice was even, uninflected, the voice of a man who processed information the way machines processed it. "He's also on someone's payroll, which you wouldn't know from looking at him. Third-tier operation out of the Port District, Novak Castle's umbrella, which means Vega money underneath it, moving product through the casino fronts down on Strand Row." Cassian looked at him. "What's his connection to the woman?" "Relationship. 8 months, neighbors say. She didn't know about his work, or at least that's the working assumption." A pause. "Here's where it gets more complicated. She's a dispatcher for the city emergency network. Apparently over the past couple months, Mercer had access to her workstation on multiple occasions. She brought him to her office once when she worked late." The silence stretched. "He accessed files," Cassian said. "He accessed files. We don't know exactly what yet, but the city dispatch database runs parallel to the federal witness coordination network in this district. There's a protected roster in that system. Witnesses scheduled to testify in the Kellerman trial." The Kellerman trial. Cassian knew the name the way he knew most things about Blackwater's official machinery, at a remove, as a variable in a larger equation. Kellerman was a city councilman's financial operation. Corrupt contracting, kickback networks, money moving through the city's infrastructure projects. The trial was 2 months out. The witnesses were the kind of witnesses that made prosecutors look like they had done something that mattered. "How exposed?" Cassian asked. "We don't know what Mercer actually pulled. Could be nothing. Could be everything." Harlan drank his coffee. "But here's what we do know. 2 hours ago, before you went to Whitmore Lane, there was a query run on her name through the city database. Not a police query. Someone outside the department running her through a system they shouldn't have access to." Cassian looked at the stairs. "She's already in someone's sights," Harlan said. "She just doesn't know it yet. She needs to know." "She needs to sleep," Harlan said, which was as close as he ever came to arguing. "And you need to decide what this is before morning." Cassian said nothing for a moment. He looked at the staircase, at the place where Alara Quinn had gone up and out of sight, the borrowed coat still around her shoulders. "Make sure the east perimeter rotation is doubled," he said, "and I want eyes on Mercer's location." Harlan nodded, already moving. Cassian went back to his study. The bourbon was still there, still at 2 fingers, still untouched. He sat behind the desk and did not look at the ledgers. He looked instead at the phone, the matte black one, the one almost nobody had, and thought about a woman's voice saying 6 words in the dark. He thought about the way she'd taken the coat. Not gratefully, not with the relieved collapse of someone who had found rescue. She had taken it the way someone took something they knew might have to be given back. Like she was keeping an account, even in the worst moment of the night, of what was owed and what it might cost. He thought about the name she'd given him. Alara Quinn. He had known a Quinn once. Not well. Not close. But the name sat against something in the back of his memory and pressed. He opened the center drawer of his desk and found the photograph he kept there. He didn't look at it often. He looked at it now. A crumpled print, old enough that the color had shifted toward yellow at the edges, showing a street corner he recognized as the Galloway district, long before the city had gentrified that block into something unrecognizable. 2 people. A young woman, early 20s in the picture, dark-haired, frightened, a bloodied shoulder, being helped toward a doorway by a man Cassian had never been able to fully identify. The man's face was turned away from the camera, but his jacket was visible, and on the shoulder of the jacket, a press credential on a lanyard. Cassian's sister had described him, once, years later, kind eyes. Dark hair going gray at the temples, even though he hadn't looked that old. He'd gotten her off the street when 3 men had come for her near the Galloway waterfront, during the worst period of the turf wars, when bodies showed up in the harbor weekly and nobody on the street felt safe. He had never found the man. He had been trying for years. He looked at the name in his memory and let it settle. Quinn. He did not move for a long time after that. The bourbon caught the lamplight and held it. The rain hammered the windows. Somewhere upstairs, in a room behind bulletproof glass, a woman named Alara Quinn slept inside the most protected house in Blackwater City. Not knowing that the man who'd carried her out of a burning wreck of an evening had been looking for her father for nearly a decade. And not knowing that someone else, someone with resources and reach and absolutely no interest in keeping her alive, had already begun to look for her. Cassian finally reached for the bourbon. He held it without drinking. Somewhere in the Port District, in a part of the city where the streetlights had been broken long enough that the city had stopped replacing them, a phone rang in a room Cassian Vale had not found yet. A man answered it with 2 words. She survived. And on the other end of the line, a voice that wore power the way expensive suits wore it, smooth, cold, so utterly at ease with itself that it barely needed to raise above a murmur to communicate threat, said simply, "Fix it." The call ended, and the rain kept falling on Blackwater City, indifferent and relentless, as if it had been falling forever and intended to keep falling long after every secret the city carried had been dragged into the light or buried so deep it would never surface again. Cassian Vale set down the bourbon untouched, pushed back from the desk, and went to stand at the window. 41 floors below, the harbor stretched black and enormous into the dark. Somewhere out there, pieces were already moving that he had not yet accounted for. For the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, he had the feeling, not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that moved through the chest the way cold water moved, that this was not a situation he had chosen. This was a situation that had chosen him. And before the sun rose over Blackwater's skyline, he would need to decide what that meant. Part 2, The Weight of Knowing. The sun came up dirty over Blackwater City. It pushed through the harbor fog in thin, grudging strips of light that turned the water the color of old iron, and by the time it had climbed high enough to reach the estate on the promontory, it had already lost whatever warmth it might have carried. The kind of morning that arrived not as a beginning, but as a continuation, as if the night hadn't actually ended, just changed its clothes. Cassian had not slept. He was at his desk when Harlan came in at 6:45 with a folder and a fresh cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had also not slept, which on Harlan's face looked exactly the same as every other expression he wore, which was to say, it looked like nothing at all. He set the folder on the desk and the coffee beside it and stood back. Cassian opened the folder. The first page was a photograph. Royce Mercer, taken from a distance, standing outside a building on the port waterfront that Cassian recognized as one of 3 properties held under a shell corporation tied to Novak Castle's operation. Time-stamped 11 months ago. A second photograph. Mercer inside what looked like a casino back office, shaking hands with a man whose face had been partially cropped. The man's ring was visible, a heavy gold piece with a distinctive inlay that Cassian had seen before on the hand of a mid-level Vega lieutenant named Tomas Breck. Mercer wasn't just on payroll, Harlan said. He was running errands. Specifically, he was moving communication between Breck's people and someone inside the city network. We think that's what he was actually after in her workstation. Not the witness list itself, the access credentials. Cassian looked up from the photograph. He was using her. 8 months, Harlan said, which means whoever sent him in knew what her job was before she knew who he was. The silence in the room had a particular quality to it, the kind that accumulated when you were adding numbers and the total kept coming out worse than you expected. Pull everything we have on Tomas Breck, Cassian said, and find out who initiates for the Vega network on city government penetration. That's not Breck's level of operation. I already started that thread. Harlan paused. There's something else. Cassian waited. The query on her name last night. I traced the access point. It came from a terminal inside the city council's administrative building, specifically from the office suite on the 4th floor. Cassian set down the photograph. Who occupies the 4th floor? He asked, though from the way the night had already been moving, some part of him had begun to anticipate the answer before Harlan gave it. Councilman Gideon Wren's staff, Harlan said. Constituent Services and City Development Coordination, clean public operation on paper. Wren's been in office 11 years, hasn't had so much as a parking complaint attached to his name. Nobody's that clean. Nobody is, Harlan agreed. But he's been careful.
or he's had someone careful doing it for him. Cassian closed the folder. He looked at the window, at the harbor below, at the morning light doing nothing useful for the water or anything near it. "Where's Mercer?" he asked. "Somewhere uncomfortable," Harlan said, which was the only kind of answer he gave to that kind of question. "He'll talk when we need him to." "Not yet. I want him sitting with it for a while."
Cassian stood up from the desk, the movement deliberate and unhurried, the way he moved through most things, like a man who understood that speed was sometimes the enemy of accuracy. "How is she?" "A beat. Just slightly longer than necessary." "Sylvie says she's been up since 5, Harlan said. "She asked for coffee and a phone. Sylvie gave her the coffee." "The phone?" "She told her to wait." Cassian moved toward the door. "Get me a clean handset, prepaid, nothing traceable." She was in the east sitting room when he found her, which was not where he'd put her, and not where Sylvie would have led her, which meant she had found it herself, a fact he noted without expression. The room looked out over the harbor from a different angle than his office did, lower and more direct, the water visible between a gap in the estate's perimeter trees. She was sitting on the edge of an armchair rather than in it, her back straight, the borrowed coat folded across the arm beside her. She had cleaned up. The blood was gone from her face, her hair pulled back, but the bruising around her eye had developed overnight into something that couldn't be minimized, and the split lip had sealed in the tight, tender way split lips did. She was holding the empty coffee cup in both hands, the way she had held the water cup in the car, like she needed something to hold on to, and this was what was available. She looked up when he came in, and her expression did the thing it had done in the kitchen, that fast, careful assessment, running the variables before she committed to a response. "Your house has an uncomfortable amount of hallways," she said. "That's intentional." "I noticed." She set the cup down on the table beside her. "I also noticed the cameras, the ones that look like architectural details." Cassian sat in the chair across from her. He put the prepaid phone on the table between them, which she looked at but didn't reach for yet. "Who do you need to call?" he asked. "My supervisor. I'm supposed to be on shift in 4 hours." A pause. "And my sister. She'll have seen something on the police scanner. She always does. She monitors them. I don't know why. Force of habit from when we were kids, I think." Something moved across her face when she said it, brief and unguarded, and she smoothed it back down. "She worries. You can use the phone." "I know." She looked at it, still didn't touch it. "I want to understand something first." He waited. "Why did that number work?" she asked. "That number I called. Someone gave it to me 6 months ago. A man I met once at a city council meeting. I was there for a dispatchers union thing. He was standing outside the building, older man, gray suit, gave me a card with just that number on it, said if I was ever in serious trouble to use it. I thought it was—" She stopped, chose a different word than whatever she'd been reaching for. "I thought it was nothing. A strange thing that happened once. But I kept the card." Cassian considered how much of this to answer and in what order. "The man who gave you the card works for me," he said. "He screens for certain kinds of situations, people who might need a direct line." "Why?" "Because the official lines don't always work for the kind of trouble that finds certain kinds of people." "That's a very careful answer." "Most of my answers are." She looked at him. The undamaged eye was a deep brown that was almost black in the morning light, and it had the quality of an eye that had been trained to look past what was immediately in front of it. "You're a criminal," she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a categorization. The same tone she might have used to say, "You're left-handed." "I run businesses," Cassian said, "that other people would describe differently." "Other people describe most things differently than I do." A silence. She reached forward and picked up the phone, turned it over in her hands, set it back down. "The man who was hitting me," she said. "Royce. He wasn't— I knew he had a temper. I didn't know he had a job." She said the last word with a particular flatness, the word used as a container for something with more weight than it normally carried. "Did you know that before you came?" "I knew it by the time we left." "How?" "The gun wasn't a scared man's gun," Cassian said. "It was a working man's gun, the way he reached for it."
Something shifted in her expression, something she was recalibrating. You rid people like that. I've had practice. I rid people like that too, she said quietly. It's what dispatchers do. You listen to a voice for 30 seconds and you make 20 decisions about what's real and what isn't, what the person needs versus what they're asking for. She paused. I should have read him better. I had 8 months. People don't perform their worst qualities consistently, Cassian said. If they did, they'd be easier to avoid. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite argument, something in between. I need to tell you something, she said. About Royce. About what I think he might have taken. She told it plainly, without drama, the way people told things when they had been processing them alone for hours, and had already squeezed out the emotional content and were left with the facts. She described the nights he had come to her office. She described the login credentials for the dispatch database, her username, her password, which she had been careless about because he was there and she trusted him, and you trusted the people you let into your spaces. She described the structure of the database, the layers of it, the parallel systems she had been briefed on during onboarding and had been told explicitly not to discuss outside secure channels. When she was done, Cassian said, "The Kellerman trial." She went still. You know about the Kellerman trial. I know about everything that moves through this city. Then you know what those witnesses mean. Her voice had dropped. Not softer, smaller in the specific way voices got when they were carrying something very heavy and were tired of carrying it. If Royce pulled those credentials and passed them to whoever he works for, if someone has access to that roster, I know what it means, Cassian said. Those are real people, she said, and there was a sharpness in it now, a fine-point anger, the kind that didn't raise its voice but cut clean. They're not abstractions. They came forward because someone convinced them it was safe, and if— I understand, Cassian said, and he said it with enough weight that she stopped. He looked at her directly. I'm not dismissing it. I'm telling you I understand exactly what the exposure means, and I'm already working on it. Working on it? She repeated. Yes. What does that mean for a man like you? It means the people responsible will not have the opportunity to use what Mercer gave them, Cassian said. That's what it means. She looked at him for a long moment. The harbor was bright behind her through the window, a painful winter brightness that threw everything into hard shadow. I don't know whether to be relieved by that or more frightened, she said. Both is reasonable, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. The damaged lip stopped it. I want to help, she said. Not as someone being protected. As someone who actually knows this system. I have 14 months of dispatch training and 6 months on the Kellerman-adjacent network protocols. I know things about how that database is structured that nobody outside the department knows. You're not a trained operative. No, she said. But I'm not an idiot either, and I'm already in the middle of this. Sitting in a room doesn't change that. It just means I'm useless while I'm in danger instead of useful. Cassian studied her, the straight back, the hands that had stopped shaking. He didn't answer right away. He stood and went to the window and looked at the harbor for a moment, his back to her. And in the silence, she didn't press, which told him she understood something about timing. Make your calls, he said finally. Sylvie will bring you breakfast. We'll talk more this afternoon. He moved toward the door. Cassian. He stopped without turning. Thank you, she said. For last night, I know it probably doesn't mean anything to you, but I needed to say it out loud. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, without turning around, It means something. And he left her with the phone and the harbor light and whatever she made of that. The afternoon arrived with the news that Royce Mercer had talked. Cassian received it in the garage where Decker had brought the relevant parties for a conversation, which was a location chosen for reasons of acoustics and cleanup and distance from the main house. Harlan delivered the summary concisely. Mercer had passed credentials and partial database structure to Tomas Breck 10 days ago. Breck had passed it up the chain. The chain's top was not Novak Castle. Castle was the umbrella, but the actual architecture of the city network penetration, the who moves what to whom and the why,
traced through 3 more layers of insulation to a financial coordination structure inside City Development Contracting. City Development Contracting, which was Councilman Gideon Wren's legislative portfolio. "Is it enough to take to anyone official?" Harlan asked. Cassian looked at him. "Right," Harlan said. He meant no. He meant, in a city where the prosecutor's office had 2 people tied to Wren's donor network, and the police department had captains who had been beneficiaries of city contracting decisions for years, taking anything official was a fast way to make it disappear. "I want everything on Wren," Cassian said. "His entire operation, who he uses, how the money moves, where the pressure points are. I want it documented in a form that can survive him." Harlan nodded and left. Decker stayed, which meant Decker had something to add. "The Vega people know she's here," Decker said. Cassian looked at him. "Mercer made a call before we picked him up," Decker said. "Short. We think he got a message out that she was still alive and that whoever responded came was not police. How long do we have before they move?" "At current resource levels? Maybe 48 hours before they feel confident enough to try something here." Cassian looked at the floor of the garage, at the oil stains and the dust, at the ordinary surfaces of a place that had nothing to do with any of what was happening. "Double everything," he said, "and tell Harlan I want alternative locations scouted. We may need to move her." But she was in his private office when he got back to the main house, which was not where he had left her, and which, given that the office was on a floor that required a key card and a specific stairwell that wasn't visible from the east sitting room, represented a feat of navigation that he stood in the doorway and considered for a moment before deciding it was more impressive than alarming. She was standing at the side of his desk, not behind it, her arms crossed over her chest, looking at the papers spread across the surface. Not touching them. Looking. She turned when she heard him. She didn't look apologetic. "You have more information on the Kellerman network than the city prosecutors do," she said. "Probably," he said. "How?" "I pay attention." "You pay people," she said. "That too." She uncrossed her arms. "I want to see what you have. On Wren, on the casino operations, on the connections to the dispatch network." She said it levelly, looking straight at him, the way she had been looking straight at him since the kitchen floor, like she had made a decision at some point in the night to stop being afraid of him specifically, whatever else she was afraid of. "Why?" Cassian asked. "Because I've been doing dispatch for 14 months, she said. "And in those 14 months I have personally routed 462 calls from the Strand Row district. That's where the casinos are. And I have the memory for voices that every good dispatcher has. I have recognized voices. I have flagged calls. I have a list in my head that nobody else has because it lives in here." She touched her temple. "And not in any database that Mercer could touch." Cassian stood in the doorway and did not move. He was thinking. She let him. "Sit down," he said finally. She sat across the desk. He sat behind it. He pulled the relevant folder from the lower drawer, the one he had been building for 6 weeks, since Wren's name had first surfaced in a cash flow irregularity he'd been tracking through the Port District casino books. And he opened it, and he put it between them. She read fast. He watched her read. She didn't make noise when she processed things, no small sounds of surprise or confirmation, just the eyes moving and the occasional pause where she went still and then started moving again. Once she reached forward and turned a page back to look at something she had passed, and her finger landed on a name. "Breck," she said. "Tomas Breck. He called into our dispatch center 4 times in 3 months, always traffic accidents, always different locations, never any follow-up complaint when we sent units and found nothing." She looked up. He was running patterns, testing response times, testing which units covered which sectors. Cassian looked at her. "And this number here," she said, pointing to a sequence in the financial records. "This routing prefix. I've seen this format before, in the dispatch system. It's the format used by the city's Emergency Infrastructure Billing Authority, which processes payments for contractor services on city network maintenance." She paused. "Wren's development portfolio covers city infrastructure contracts." "It does," Cassian said quietly. "He's not just profiting from the criminal network," she said. He's using the city's own financial processing infrastructure to launder it. She looked up. He's hiding dirty money inside the billing systems for emergency services. Police response. Fire. Dispatch. A pause. That's why the witness credentials were valuable to him. Because if any of those witnesses could connect the financial records to the infrastructure contracts, the whole thing unravels from the inside out. The room was quiet for a moment. You got all that from one page of financial records and a cross-reference you made in your head, Cassian said. I told you I wasn't an idiot. I didn't say you were. You implied it when you told me to sit in a room. He held her gaze. I was wrong about that, he said. He said it without ceremony, the way he said everything, but she heard it land. She looked back at the folder. So what do we do with this? We build it into something that can't be buried, Cassian said. Something that survives every official channel that Ren owns. And how long does that take? Time I'm not sure we have, he said. Someone ran your name through a city terminal last night, which means Ren's people already know you exist. They know you're connected to Mercer, and they're smart enough to know what you might know. She absorbed this. Her face didn't do the theatrical thing. It just went slightly more still, which was its own kind of tell, the way stillness on a face that had been talking could sometimes say more than movement. So I'm not just a loose end, she said. I'm a liability. You're a liability and a resource, Cassian said, depending on which side of the conversation you're having. And what side are we on? The one where you leave this city alive and the people responsible for it don't, he said. He said it plainly, without embellishment, and she looked at him for a long time after and didn't say anything, which was, he thought, the right response to something that didn't need dressing up. It was past 9 at night when Harlan knocked on the office door and came in without waiting, which he only did when it was urgent, and his face, still nothing, still the same flat surface it always was, had something just slightly off in it, some micro-tension around the jaw that Cassian had learned over 23 years to read the way other people read expressions. Elara was still there. They had been working for hours, so the folder had expanded, her memory had contributed names and patterns and timing correlations that tightened the net considerably. And Cassian had been thinking, in the back of his mind, about the photograph in his desk drawer and the name Quinn, and the way those two things kept pressing against each other. He had not said anything about it yet. Harlan stood in the doorway and looked at Cassian and said, with the economy of a man who never wasted syllables, "We found something in Mercer's apartment, after the sweep." "What?" Cassian said. Harlan put a photograph on the desk. It was a printout, low resolution, clearly grabbed from a screen rather than printed directly, the kind of thing you captured quickly from a source you couldn't take with you. It showed a man walking out of a building. The man was perhaps 60, with dark hair that had gone steel gray at the temples, wearing a journalist's press lanyard around his neck. Elara made a sound, small, involuntary. Cassian looked at her. She was staring at the photograph. The color had left her face in the specific way it left faces when something arrived that the body had been dreading before the mind caught up. "That's my father," she said. Her voice was very quiet. It had a texture in it that hadn't been there a second ago. "He's been dead for 6 years," she said. "He was a journalist. He was investigating city corruption, and he was killed in what was officially called a..." She stopped, breathed. "A hit and run, 3 blocks from his office." Cassian's hand was on the desk beside the photograph, not touching it, not moving. "Why does Royce Mercer have a photograph of my father?" she asked. And then her eyes moved from the photograph to Cassian's face, and she read it. He was too good to show much, but she was too sharp to miss the something he wasn't hiding fast enough. The stillness that was different from his regular stillness. The weight of recognition in a face that had just connected a thing it had been carrying separately for a long time. "You knew him," she said. It wasn't a question. Cassian looked at her. Across the desk. Across 6 years and a distance he wasn't sure he knew how to cross. "I've been looking for him," he said, "for 8 years. She stared at him. "He saved my sister's life," Cassian said, and his voice had something in it that wasn't there very often, something that had been stored for a long time in a place he didn't usually open.
During the Galloway waterfront incident, he got her off the street when 3 men came for her, took her somewhere safe. Never asked for anything. I never found him in time to... He stopped. She was looking at him the way people looked when the architecture of something they thought they understood had just revealed itself to be something entirely different, with foundations going deeper than they'd seen. He never told me that, she said. Very quiet. He never told me any of that. He wouldn't have, Cassian said. A silence. The harbor was dark beyond the window. The estate was quiet, in the way the estate was quiet when it was fully locked down. The specific silence of a place doing a lot of work to be silent. Then Harlan said, from the doorway, "There's something else." Cassian looked at him. The photograph wasn't the only thing in Mercer's apartment, Harlan said. He had a secondary file, paper, which is unusual. Someone was being careful about digital traces, names, addresses, movement patterns. He paused. It's a hit list. 7 names. Another pause, and Cassian heard in the compression of it what was coming before it arrived. Her name is on it. Alara's breath came out slowly, controlled, through her nose. Her hands were flat on the desk in front of her. She did not fall apart. She went into the stillness instead. Number 2, Harlan continued, and now his voice had something Cassian had rarely heard in it, something that cost the man to produce. Number 2 on the list is yours. The silence in the room was total. Cassian looked at the photograph on the desk. The old man with the press lanyard, the man who had saved his sister's life and raised this woman and been killed for what he knew, and apparently had known enough to make people afraid of him long after he was gone. Then he looked at Alara. She was looking back at him. Her father was dead. Her name was on a list. The man across from her had been looking for her father for 8 years and hadn't known she existed until last night. And someone in this city, with enough power to reach into the official infrastructure and still feel untouchable, had decided that both of them needed to. The list sat between them on the desk like something dead. 7 names. 2 of them in this room. Cassian picked it up. He read it the way he read everything, completely, once, without expression, letting it settle into the part of his mind that processed information before the rest of him caught up. 7 names. 4 he recognized as connected to the Kellerman trial network. Witnesses, a federal liaison, a paralegal from the prosecution team. 1 was a name he didn't know, but would. And then his own, and hers, written in the same unremarkable hand as the rest of them, as if being added to a list of people someone intended to erase was an administrative matter. He set it down. Alara was still looking at him. She had not moved since Harlan said it. Her hands were flat on the desk and her back was straight, and she was holding herself together through some internal mechanism that had nothing to do with feeling fine, because nobody looked like that when they felt fine. How fresh is this list? Cassian asked Harlan. The paper was printed in the last 72 hours. The ink is recent, which means it wasn't assembled for the past. It was assembled for right now. Cassian looked at the doorway. Mercer was holding it as insurance. Or he was the delivery mechanism. Either way, someone handed it to him recently enough that he hadn't passed it yet. Or he passed a copy and kept the original, Harlan said. Either way, the list exists in more than one place. Cassian stood up from the desk. The movement was slow and deliberate, the kind of slow that wasn't calm but was disciplined. I want Wren's entire public schedule for the next 2 weeks. Every public appearance, every staff meeting, every contractor sign-off. I want to know where he is every hour, already pulling it. And I want to know who else has access to city development contracting's internal communications, not just Wren's direct staff, the auxiliary network, the consultants, the third-party infrastructure managers, the people whose names don't appear on any official roster, but who are in the building twice a week. Harlan nodded and left. Cassian looked at Alara. She said, "My father was killed 3 blocks from his office, and nobody was ever charged." She said it very evenly. I spent 2 years after it happened trying to convince the department that it wasn't an accident. I had a detective, Setause, assigned to the case, who told me, personally, face-to-face, that the evidence didn't support a criminal investigation. She paused. His name is on that list, too. Cassian looked at it again, the name she meant. 3rd from the bottom,
a name he had not recognized but now recognized, a detective. "What's his name?" Cassian asked. "Brent Salas," she said. He was a homicide detective at the time. He's been promoted since. He's a precinct captain now. He runs the district that covers Strand Row, the district that covered every casino front in the Vega network. Cassian set the paper down on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment, not at anything on it. Through it, the way he looked through things when he was rearranging what he thought he knew into what he was beginning to understand. "The hit list isn't just for people who are threats to Ren right now," he said. "No," Alara said. "It's for people who could connect the current operation to older ones." He looked at her. "Your father didn't just stumble into city corruption. He was working on something that connected to what's happening now, and whatever he found, or was about to find, is still live enough that they need his daughter silenced." She breathed out slowly. 6 years, she said. "They waited 6 years and they're still cleaning." "The best operations never stop cleaning," Cassian said. It wasn't cruelty. It was an assessment, and she heard it that way. She reached across the desk and picked up the list herself. She read it with the same careful speed she'd read everything else. And when she got to the bottom, she stopped. Her finger rested on a name. Not her own, not Cassian's, not the detective's. "I know this name," she said. "Marcus Fell." "Who is he?" "He's a city infrastructure auditor. He had a minor public mention in the Kellerman pretrial coverage, about 3 paragraphs in a business journal. He flagged a discrepancy in the contracting records, and then the story just stopped." She looked up. "He disappeared from all public records about 2 months ago. I noticed because the dispatch network processes billing queries from his office and they just stopped. No forwarding address, no termination notice, nothing." "You noticed a billing query stopping," Cassian said. "I notice everything," she said. Not pride, fact. He looked at her. He thought again about her father, about the press lanyard, about the journalist's instinct for pattern, about how that kind of attention to detail was the sort of thing that ran in families the same way bone structure ran in families. "I need to make a call," he said. He went to the secondary desk phone, a hard line that routed through a scrambler in the basement, and dialed a number that he held in his head rather than any device. The call connected on the 3rd ring. "I need a location on Marcus Fell," Cassian said. "City auditor. Last known address in Blackwater, went dark approximately 8 weeks ago. Find him alive if you can." He hung up. Alara was watching him. "You have people who find missing city employees," she said. "I have people who find things," he said. "And what do you do with the things they find?" "It depends on the thing." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was complex in the way most of her expressions were complex. Multiple things running simultaneously, none of them dominant. Then she looked at the window, at the dark harbor. "What happened to your sister?" she asked. "After my father got her out." Cassian was quiet for a moment. "She got out of Blackwater," he said. "She lives somewhere else now. Has a family. She doesn't use her real name." A pause that had weight in it. "She doesn't know I'm still doing what I'm doing. I prefer it that way." "She doesn't know," Alara said slowly. "So she doesn't know that the man who saved her is dead?" "No. And she doesn't know that his daughter has been sitting in your office for the last 8 hours?" "No." Alara looked at the photograph of her father, the printed one, the low-resolution screen capture from Mercer's apartment, and something moved across her face that she didn't bother to manage. It came and went and left a different quality of stillness behind it. "He would have found this funny," she said. "In a terrible way. He had a dark sense of humor." She paused. "He used to say that the city always collected its debts eventually. He just meant it about corruption. I don't think he meant—" She stopped. "He didn't," Cassian said. She looked at him. "No," she agreed quietly. "He didn't." The breach happened at 11:47 p.m. Not an explosion, not a tactical assault, something quieter and more damaging, the kind of breach that happened inside systems rather than through walls, and that Cassian would not fully understand until it was already too late to contain. He was in the secure communications room in the estate's lower level when the first alert came through. A perimeter sensor trigger at the north wall that resolved itself within 40 seconds and was logged as an animal. Coyotes moved through the harbor promontory in the winter. The system had logged 3 similar triggers in the past month. He was not alarmed. He should have been. At 11:52, Harlan appeared in the doorway of the communications room with a look on his face that Cassian had seen perhaps 4 times in 23 years, and each time it had preceded something that required significant reassessment. "We have a problem," Harlan said. He put a tablet on the table. The screen showed a live feed from a traffic camera mounted on the intersection nearest to the estate's service entrance, a camera that was part of the city's public infrastructure network and would not ordinarily have attracted attention. But someone had flagged it, someone who monitored what the city's cameras were watching, and when. The camera had been queried 8 times in the past 6 hours from a terminal inside the Blackwater Police Department. The accessing terminal was registered to Precinct Captain Brent Salas. Cassian looked at the screen for a long time. "He knows she's here," he said. "He's known since at least this afternoon," Harlan said, "which means Wren's people have known since at least this afternoon." How did Salas connect her location to the estate? He didn't need to do it himself. Harlan took the tablet back and swiped to a second screen. "I ran a deeper trace on the city terminal that queried her name last night, the one I attributed to Wren's 4th-floor office. I was wrong about who initiated the query." Cassian looked at him. "The query was routed through Wren's office as a relay," Harlan said. "The originating terminal was in the police department, Salas's precinct." He paused. "He's not downstream of Wren. He's parallel. He's been running his own thread on her since before last night, since before Mercer's situation." He paused again. "Since before you made the call to go to Whitmore Lane." The room was cold, and it had nothing to do with temperature. Cassian thought back to the gray-suited man who had given Alara a card with his number on it 6 months ago, outside a city council meeting. He thought about the name of the man who had given her that card, a low-level contact he used for exactly that purpose, someone who surfaced quietly in official spaces and passed along emergency lifelines to people who might need them. He thought about how that man would have noted her name, logged it, filed it, and he thought about who might have access to that log. "Who else has seen my intake records?" Cassian asked very carefully. Harlan's jaw tightened, just barely. "I'm working on that." "Tell me what you already know." A silence. Harlan set the tablet down and stood with his hands at his sides, and for a man who showed nothing, the rigidity in his posture was loud. "The intake logs for the emergency contact network are stored in a segmented database," Harlan said. "Accessible to 4 people. Myself, you, 2 support contacts who handle logistics." He paused. "One of those support contacts was recruited 8 months ago." 8 months ago. The same timeline as Royce Mercer and Alara Quinn. "His name," Cassian said. "Davy Wren," Harlan said. "He handles the physical card distribution. He's the one who gave her the card outside the council building." Cassian was absolutely still. "I've been running his financials for the past 2 hours," Harlan continued, the words coming with the precise, even weight of a man who understood exactly what he was delivering. "He has a secondary account. Small deposits, irregular intervals, totaling approximately 40,000 over 7 months. The source traces to a shell that folds into 3 more shells before it reaches a holding company attached to Wren's infrastructure contractor network." He stopped. "Wren has been feeding them the intake list. Every name, every situation, every person you've reached out to in the past 8 months who might have been useful to them." The implications of that landed in Cassian's chest in order, one after another, with the particular weight of things that could not be taken back. Every person reached through the emergency contact network in 8 months. How many? What they knew. Whether any of them were still. "Are they compromised?" Cassian asked. "The other contacts on the network." "I don't know yet," Harlan said. "I'm working on it." "Where's Wren now?" "That's the rest of it," Harlan said, and his voice finally, fractionally did something. Not emotion, something that lived just adjacent to it. "He's gone. His apartment is empty. His phone is dead. He's been gone since sometime this afternoon." Gone. Which meant warned. Which meant someone inside the operation had pulled him out before the exposure closed around him. Which meant whoever was coordinating had known Harlan would trace it. Which meant, "They knew I'd find it," Cassian said. "They let you find it," Harlan said. The distinction landed like something physical. They let you find it. They pulled Ren out, left the trail just clean enough to follow, and pointed it toward Cassian's secure estate on a promontory above the harbor with nowhere to run that wasn't over water or through a city that a precinct captain now knew how to watch. Cassian turned away from Harlan and stood with his back to the room for a moment. His hands were at his sides and he was not moving, and the stillness was not the controlled professional stillness he wore like a second skin. It was something else, the stillness of a man who was looking at the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually was. He had been operating on the assumption that he was the one constructing the trap. He had been moving pieces. Mercer, the financial records, Ilara's database knowledge, Ren's exposure, toward a conclusion he intended to control. He had been inside someone else's construction the entire time. He turned back around. "Get her," he said. "Bring her down here." Ilara came down the stairs without Sylvie. She had apparently been awake, which he was no longer surprised by, and walked into the communications room and looked at the two of them and said immediately, "What happened?" Cassian told her. He told it straight, without softening the parts that reflected badly on him, because there was no version of the next several hours that worked if she didn't have the complete picture, and because she had earned the complete picture somewhere between reading the financial records and identifying Marcus Fell's name and sitting across from him while he admitted he'd been looking for her father. She listened without interrupting. Her face did the thing it did, the processing stillness, the internal accounting. And when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So the card," she said. "The man who gave me the card was feeding them information." "Yes." "Which means they've known about me for 6 months." "Yes." "They didn't move on me until last night." "No." She thought about that. Why not? If they've known about me since the card, why wait 6 months to put me on a list? It was the right question, and Cassian had been sitting with it since Harlan finished the briefing. "Because for 6 months you weren't useful to them," he said. "You were a dispatcher with access credentials and a dead father, relevant to watch, not urgent enough to act on." He paused. Mercer accelerated it. "When he pulled the database credentials, he also pulled something that connected your father's old journalism files to the current Kellerman network exposure. That's what changed the calculation. You became urgent." "My father's files," she said. "We think he had a digital archive. Somewhere in the dispatch system's attached storage, which would have been accessible through your workstation credentials." He looked at her steadily. "We think he hid something in your network, possibly without your knowledge. Possibly years ago." She was very quiet for a long moment. Her eyes were on the wall somewhere to the left of him, focused on something internal. "He used to come to my office," she said slowly. "Before he died. He said he liked watching the city work. The real machinery, not the public face." A pause. "He had a USB drive, small one, green. He used it to charge his phone from my workstation," he said. She stopped. "He never charged his phone. He had a portable battery. He always had it." She looked at Cassian. "I was 23 and I didn't think to ask why he kept doing something he didn't need to do." The silence was its own kind of sound. "He was storing files in your workstation's peripheral memory," Cassian said. "The green drive," she said. "I still have it. I kept it because it was just something of his. I kept it in my desk, in the dispatch office." Her face changed. "Mercer was in my office. He was at my workstation." "He didn't just take your credentials," Cassian said. "He took the drive." She put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "So Ren has my father's files. Whatever was on the drive. And if my father had what I think he had..." She stopped. Started again. "He spent 3 years investigating city development corruption. He had sources inside 3 government departments. He told me 2 weeks before he died that he had found the connection between a decade of infrastructure fraud and the people running it. He said it went higher than anyone would believe." She looked up. He said when it came out, it would end careers plural, and possibly worse. She breathed. And then he was killed. Cassian looked at her. If those files are complete, she said, and if Ren has them, he's not just using them to understand his exposure. He's using them to know exactly who else to clean. The rest of the hit list. The names they didn't fully understand yet. The people her father had marked as sources, as witnesses, as threads. Still alive 6 years later, still carrying knowledge, still vulnerable. We have to get those files back, Alara said. Ren will have transferred them out of any physical location by now, Cassian said. He'll have secured them somewhere insulated. Then we find out where. We have Mercer, she said. He had the drive last. He knows who he gave it to and when. He knows the chain of custody. She paused. You told me he was somewhere uncomfortable. Put him somewhere more uncomfortable and ask him again. Cassian looked at her. He thought about the woman on the kitchen floor who had been holding herself very small. And he thought about the woman across this table who was looking at him with her father's dead eyes alive in her face. And he thought they were the same person, and that was remarkable and cost him something to acknowledge. Before he could speak, the first explosion hit. It came from the north side of the estate, not close, but not far. A compression in the air that preceded the sound itself by half a second, then a deep crack that resonated through the building's foundation. Not a small device. Military grade, or the equivalent available to people with money and connections and a precinct captain willing to look away from the right traffic cameras. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked on 7 seconds later, painting everything in red-tinted backup illumination that turned the communications room into something that looked like the inside of a bad decision. Cassian was already moving. Harlan, perimeter breach, north wall, Harlan said, already on comms. 5 entry points. They're not being quiet about it. They weren't being quiet because they didn't need to be quiet. A precinct captain knew who to call to keep the right patrol units on the far side of the city tonight. Cassian moved to the weapons cabinet on the east wall, opened it with the 4-digit code, and began making selections with the focused economy of a man who had done this before. He pulled a second weapon and turned to Alara. She looked at it. She looked at him. I know how, she said. My father taught me. He grew up somewhere that made him think it was a necessary skill. She took it. She checked it. She did it correctly. A second explosion, closer. Somewhere above them a window shattered. Not from direct impact, but from the pressure wave, glass falling onto marble with a sound like a chandelier dropping. Harlan said, They've got the east entrance. Which meant they had planned this against the estate's specific layout, which meant someone had fed them the layout, which meant this was what it had all been moving toward. The trail that led here. The camera queries that confirmed she was here. The timing, patient and exact, waiting until both names on the list were in the same building at the same time. The tunnel, Cassian said. The tunnel ran from the estate's basement to an exit point 300 meters down the promontory, coming up inside a boathouse that sat against the waterline. Cassian had built it for exactly this eventuality. For the night someone came with enough force and enough intelligence about his operation to make the walls irrelevant. He had not expected that night to also be the night he learned his operation had been penetrated from the inside. He led her through the basement, through a door behind the boiler housing, into the tunnel. It was narrow and low-ceilinged, and lit by strip lighting that ran along one wall at knee height, throwing everything into a strange, flat illumination that made the space feel like something from a different kind of story. They moved fast. Behind them, muffled by stone and distance, the sounds of the estate coming apart filtered down. Gunfire, concentrated and professional. The kind of exchange that happened between people who knew what they were doing, which meant Cassian's people were holding, for now, which meant he had minutes and not less. Harlan was behind them, on comms, relaying in short bursts. Alara moved through the tunnel without looking back, without stumbling, her breathing controlled and audible in the tight space. Once she caught herself on the wall where the floor dipped, her hand pressed flat against the stone, she righted, kept moving. 30 meters from the tunnel exit, Harlan said, "Decker's down." Cassian kept moving. He did not stop. He processed it in the part of his mind that processed losses while the rest of him continued functioning, because that was the mechanism, because that was what 20 years of doing this had built. Because if he stopped every time he lost someone, he would have stopped permanently a long time ago. But Decker had worked for him for 23 years, and something in his chest registered it as more than a variable. The boathouse was dark and smelled of salt water and diesel and old wood. 2 boats were moored inside. Cassian went to the second one. Faster, lower profile, a rigid inflatable with a silent electric motor that he kept charged for exactly this purpose, and started it while Harlan secured the boathouse door. Alara climbed in without being told. She sat in the forward position and looked at the harbor entrance, at the gap in the boathouse doors that showed a strip of black water and the distant lights of the commercial port. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Away from here first," Cassian said. "The rest comes after." He moved the boat toward the doors. Harlan pushed them open from the dock and dropped into the boat as it cleared the threshold. And then they were on the water, the estate's lights burning behind them on the promontory, 2 of the upper floors now visibly orange at the windows. Alara looked back at it, the burning windows. The place she had been taken for protection that was now the thing on fire. She looked forward again. "They had this planned," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Cassian said. "All of it. From the beginning." She paused. "The card. Ren. Getting me into your operation. Getting both of us in the same place." She breathed. "Ren set this entire thing in motion." "Ren or someone above Ren," Cassian said. She looked at him sharply. "Above Ren?" "Someone who operates the way this has been operated. Patience, multiple layers, contingencies, the ability to pull a man out cleanly and leave a trail that points exactly where they want it to point." He watched the dark water ahead of them. "That's not a city councilman. That's infrastructure." She was quiet for a moment. The boat cut silently through the harbor chop, the electric motor barely a presence beneath them. "My father said it went higher than anyone would believe," she said. "Your father was right," Cassian said. "And they have his files now." "Yes." "Which means they know exactly how far his research went, exactly which threads he pulled, exactly which names he had." She paused. "Which means everyone on that list, everyone he ever spoke to, they're already marked." "Yes." She was silent for a long moment. The harbor was enormous around them in the dark. The city's skyline threw light against the low clouds, smearing the sky above the buildings orange and white, making the darkness on the water feel more complete by contrast. "Then we have nothing," she said. "No safe house, no files, no leverage. Decker is dead. Your operation has a hole in it the size of—" She stopped, breathed. "We have nothing." Cassian looked at the water ahead. He thought about what nothing meant. He thought about what it meant to rebuild from nothing, which he had done once before, at the beginning, when he had been younger and the city had been different and the stakes had been personal in a different way. "We have Mercer," he said, "and we have what you carry in your head." He paused. "And we have each other, which 6 days ago neither of us had." She looked at him. The harbor light barely reached them out here, and her face was mostly shadow, the bruising invisible in the dark, just the quality of her looking at him. "That's not much," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." Another pause. "You're going to war over this," she said. "Properly. Not just defending, actually going after them." He looked at her. "I know that face," she said. "My father made that face once, the week before he died." Her voice did not break. It found a lower register and stayed there. "I'm asking you not to make the same mistake he made. Whatever you're planning, don't do it alone." Cassian held her gaze across the boat. He thought about Decker. He thought about the photograph in his desk drawer that was now ash in the ruins of his estate. He thought about the 7 names on a hit list and the unknown number of people his father's files had exposed to a machine that had been running quietly and lethally through this city for longer than he had been building his own empire. He thought about what it meant that someone had been patient enough to run an 8-month penetration operation against him, and what kind of institutional reach that patience required, and what it meant that they had played that carefully and still decided to move tonight.
They decided to move tonight because something had changed. Something had made them feel the timeline was closing. He thought about what had changed. He looked at Alara. She had connected the billing codes to the infrastructure contracts. She had identified Fel. She had placed Salas inside the original network. She had remembered the green drive, her father's visits, the things she had stored in her memory for 6 years without knowing what they built toward. They moved tonight because of her. Because someone in Ren's operation had understood, before Cassian fully had, what Alara Quinn was actually capable of when she sat down with the right information. They were afraid of her. The boat moved through the dark harbor, away from the burning estate, toward the lights of the far waterfront. Blackwater City spread across the skyline ahead of them, enormous, indifferent, full of the machinery of corruption that had been running through it for years. And the people it had swallowed, and the man whose daughter was sitting 2 feet away from Cassian Vale in the dark with her father's dead research still alive somewhere in her head and a weapon in her hand, and the particular expression of someone who had been pushed to the far waterfront smelled like diesel and dead fish, and the particular cold that came off the harbor in winter, the kind that got into the joints and stayed there. Cassian pulled the boat into a maintenance slip beneath the commercial pier at Dock 14. A berth he had never used and never registered, purchased through a holding company that had been established before Ren joined the operation, and therefore clean, one of perhaps 6 assets in Blackwater he was now confident hadn't been compromised. He killed the motor, and the silence came back, broken only by water against the pilings and the distant sound of the city running its nighttime machinery. Harlan tied off without being told. Alara climbed out onto the dock and stood with her arms crossed against the cold, looking at the skyline behind them, where the promontory was still faintly orange against the low clouds. Cassian stood on the dock and looked at it too, for 3 seconds, and then turned away. There were things you could afford to feel and things you couldn't afford to feel right now, and the line between them was the difference between surviving the next 12 hours and not. The estate had contained 23 years of architecture. The photograph. Decker's empty chair. He put all of it in a compartment, and he closed the compartment, and he would deal with what was inside it later, when later existed. "We need a location," he said. Harlan already had the phone to his ear. "Working on it. Mercer is still at the secondary site. It's clean. It was never in any intake log." "And Marcus Fell?" "My contact came back 20 minutes ago. Fell is alive. He's been held in an apartment in the Calder district, residential, low profile. Vega operation, but light staffing. They weren't expecting anyone to find him." Cassian looked at Harlan. "How long to get there?" 20 minutes. But if we move on Fell's location, Ren's people will know within the hour. We lose the element of... "We already lost that element when they burned my house," Cassian said. "We're not running a quiet operation anymore. We're running a fast one." Harlan lowered the phone. He looked at Cassian with the flat expression that had weathered 23 years of exactly this kind of decision, and he nodded. Alara said, "I'm coming." Both men looked at her. "Fell knows me," she said. "My father mentioned my name in his reporting. Fell was one of his sources. If Fell is scared and held somewhere against his will, and 2 men he doesn't know walk through the door, he shuts down. If he sees me, he talks." She held Cassian's gaze. "You know I'm right." He did know. He didn't like it, and he knew it. "You stay behind me," he said. "You do not move independently. You do not engage unless there is no other option. If it goes wrong, you get out. Harlan will have the route." "Understood," she said. No hesitation, no performance of bravery, just the word, clean and functional. Cassian looked at Harlan. "Call the remaining crew. I want 4 people at the Calder address before we arrive." The apartment building on Calder Street was the kind of structure that had once been respectable and had been declining ever since. 6 stories of brick with a facade that hadn't been maintained in a decade. Buzzer panel half-functional. Lobby that smelled of mildew and old carpet. The kind of building where people learn not to notice what their neighbors were doing. They came in through the service entrance at the back, the lock handled in 4 seconds by a man named Kovacs, who said nothing and moved like someone who had made a career of being unremarkable. 2 more of Cassian's people were on the stairwell. One was already on the 4th floor landing. Marcus Fell was in 4F. The door was not reinforced, which confirmed light staffing.
Nobody had expected the location to need serious defense. There was one man inside with Fell. Cassian knew this from Harlan's contact's assessment and confirmed it from the specific sound of one chair, one set of footsteps moving across the floor when Kovac knocked twice and said, in a serviceable imitation of a building super's irritated cadence, "Water shut off, 10 minutes." The footsteps moved toward the door. What happened when it opened took about 4 seconds and was not loud. Cassian walked in. The apartment was what it looked like from the outside. A single room with a kitchenette, windows that faced a brick wall, furniture that had come with the place and wished it hadn't. Marcus Fell was in the bedroom, which was separated from the main room by a half wall that didn't reach the ceiling. He was sitting on the edge of a cot with his wrists zip-tied to a support pipe running up the wall behind him, secured but not brutalized, which indicated he had been kept functional for a reason. He was perhaps 55, thin in the way people got thin when they had stopped eating properly for weeks, gray at the hairline, which had advanced considerably from the photograph Harlan had sourced. He had the eyes of a man who had been calculating odds continuously and not finding any of them favorable. He looked at Cassian, then at Harlan cutting the zip ties, and then he looked past both of them, and his expression changed. "Ilara Quinn," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "He said you'd come someday. I didn't think he meant like this." She crossed the room and crouched in front of him. She looked at his wrists, at the marks the ties had left. She looked at his face. "Marcus," she said, "my father trusted you." "Your father was the only person in this city worth trusting," Fell said, "and they killed him for it." "I know," she said. "Tell me about the files." Fell looked at Cassian, assessment running fast across his exhausted face. He looked back at Ilara. He made a decision. "The USB," he said. "Your father copied the master archive to 3 locations. One was your workstation, the drive. One was a physical deposit in a lockbox at the Merchant Street post office, registered under a name I don't know. And the third..." He paused. He looked at his wrists. The third was embedded in the city's own infrastructure billing system, a hidden partition in the emergency services network. He built it in during a maintenance window 18 months before he died. He had access through a contractor credential. Ilara sat back on her heels. Her father had hidden his evidence inside the system they were using to launder the money. "They don't know about the third copy," Fell said. "They got the drive. They haven't found the lockbox yet. I don't know that location." "But the partition in the billing system." He looked at Ilara. "Only someone with active dispatch credentials can access it. He built it to open with a specific access pattern, a sequence of billing queries entered in the right order." He paused. "He gave me the sequence. He said if anything happened to him, I should find you." The room was very quiet. "You've had this information for 6 years, Cassian said. Not accusatory, factual. "I've been afraid for 6 years, Fell said, and he said it without shame because it was the truth, and the truth was all he had left. "I'm a city auditor. I'm not built for this. I flagged one contracting discrepancy, and I was in a car with 2 men telling me what would happen if I said another word about it. I went quiet. I stayed quiet." He looked at Ilara. "And then they grabbed me off my street 8 weeks ago because apparently going quiet wasn't enough anymore. Apparently Ren is cleaning everything your father ever touched." "The sequence," Cassian said. "Give it to her." Fell did. He recited it from memory. A specific string of billing reference codes entered in a specific order into the dispatch system's query interface. Ilara listened, and her lips moved faintly as she locked it in. "I'll remember it," she said. Cassian believed her. "We need a terminal," she said, standing up and looking at him. "A live connection to the city dispatch network. We need the files your father built, and we need them before Ren finds that partition." She paused. "Where's the nearest access point that isn't already burned?" Cassian thought for 2 seconds. "The dispatch satellite office on Renner Street. Secondary hub. Handles overflow routing for the port district. Smaller staff, minimal security, tied to the main network." "How do we get in?" "The same way we get into everything," he said. They moved through Blackwater at 1 a.m. in a vehicle that had never been registered to anything Cassian owned, and the city moved around them the way cities moved at that hour. Thinly, with the specific quality of a place that had lowered its guard without actually being safe. Alara sat in the back and did not speak. Cassian watched her from the front seat and saw the thing happening in her that sometimes happened to people before they did something that mattered. A settling, a compression, the outward stillness of interior machinery running at full load. Her father had built an archive inside the city's own system and had spent the last year and a half of his life knowing it was there and not knowing if he would live long enough to use it. He had put his daughter's access pattern in the mind of a man he trusted and had hoped that the chain would hold. The chain had held. 6 years, 2 deaths, 1 burning estate, and a boat ride across a black harbor, and the chain had held. The Renner Street dispatch office was a single-story building tucked between a freight depot and a parking structure. Its signage minimal and its lighting adequate without being inviting. 1 security guard at the entrance, internal. Cassian had been inside twice in 6 years for reasons unrelated to this, which meant he knew the layout and the guard rotation and the fact that the northeast emergency exit had a sensor that had been malfunctioning since the previous spring and had not been repaired because nobody had flagged it in the maintenance budget. Harlan went in first, then Kovacs. Cassian followed with Alara behind him, and the northeast exit opened without resistance, and they were inside. The main floor had 3 active workstations running on overnight automation, billing cycle processors that ran continuously regardless of staffing. The dispatch terminals were powered down for the night, but not offline. Alara went to the nearest one, sat down, and began without preamble. Her hands on the keyboard had a quality to them that Cassian recognized, the specific quality of someone operating in their native environment. The hesitation and the carefulness that she brought to unfamiliar things was completely gone. She moved through the login sequence, the network authentication, the system interface, with the speed of someone who had been doing this for a year and knew exactly where everything lived. Cassian stood behind her and watched the door. Harlan was at the entrance. Kovacs was at the window. "I'm in the billing network," she said quietly, running the sequence. Her fingers entered the codes Fell had given her. A pause. The system hesitated. He could see it in the cursor blinking on her screen, a momentary processing lag that was different from the normal interface lag, something deeper, something responding to a request it hadn't fielded in years. Then a partition opened. It was large, significantly larger than he expected. Not a handful of documents, but an archive, organized with the precision of someone who had been building it methodically over years. Financial records, cross-referenced against city contracting databases. Communication logs. Wire transfer sequences. Names, dates, transactions. The architecture of a corruption network laid out with the clarity of a journalist who had understood that the story was only as good as the evidence and had built the evidence accordingly. "It's all here," Alara said. Her voice had something in it that was not professional composure, but was what professional composure looked like when it was barely containing something much larger. Everything. A pause. He had 14 years of it. He was building this for 14 years. Cassian looked at the screen. He thought about a man with a press lanyard pulling a young woman off a street in the Galloway district and not asking for anything in return. He thought about what kind of person spent 14 years building a case inside a system that was trying to bury him. He thought about what it cost to be that patient and that careful and then be killed 3 blocks from your office in what was officially called an accident. "Copy everything," he said. "Every file. Multiple formats." Alara was already doing it. She had found the export function and she was moving fast, selecting, confirming, directing the output to a partition that would survive a network reset. Then Harlan said, "We've got company." Not loud, not panicked. Harlan's version of urgency, which was the same as his version of everything else except about 15% faster. Cassian moved to the window beside Kovacs. 2 vehicles on Renner Street, stopping outside. Not police vehicles, civilian SUVs, dark, the kind of vehicle that didn't announce what it was. "How many?" Cassian said. 4 in each. Someone flagged the access, Harlan said. "The billing partition. It's set to alert on access." "How long until the copy completes?" Cassian called to Alara. 3 minutes, she said, and her voice had changed. It had gone to the register it went to when she was processing threat and function simultaneously. She did not look up from the screen. "Maybe less." 3 minutes. 8 men outside, currently assessing the building, which gave them approximately 90 seconds before the assessment became a breach. Send everything that's copied so far to an external address, Cassian said. Now, don't wait for the full copy. I need a secure destination. He gave her an email address, a dead drop he'd held for 4 years, never used, established before Ren, before any of this. She typed it and sent without pausing. The front door opened, not the northeast entrance, the main entrance, which meant one of them had a key, which meant this wasn't Ren's street-level operators. This was someone with official access, which pointed to exactly one person on the list. Captain Brent Salas walked into the Renner Street dispatch office in plain clothes, and with 2 men beside him and a weapon already in his hand, and he scanned the room with the practiced eye of a man who had done enforcement work for 20 years, and found Cassian Vale standing 12 feet away with a level expression and a weapon of his own. The 2 men froze. Salas did not. Put it down, Vale, Salas said. This doesn't need to be messier than it already is. You're in the wrong building, Captain, Cassian said. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Salas moved laterally, putting a workstation between himself and Cassian, his eyes flicking to Alara at the terminal, to Harlan near the entrance. He was counting. He found his number and didn't like it, but didn't show it more than a tightened jaw. Step away from the terminal. Alara did not step away from the terminal. I said step away. She's busy, Cassian said. Salas looked at him with the specific look of a man who had been running a calculation for years and had arrived at the moment where the calculation had to be executed. There was something in it that was almost relief. The relief of a man who had been careful for so long and was tired of being careful. Your father, Salas said to Alara, not moving his eyes from Cassian, was a problem that took 3 years to properly address. Don't make yourself another one. The room was very still. Alara's hands had stopped on the keyboard. Cassian saw it happen. Saw the words land and what they did to her, the small catastrophic thing they caused in her face that lasted only a fraction of a second before she pressed it flat. Not just my father was killed. My father was a problem that took 3 years to properly address. The admission of it, casual and almost contemptuous, from the man who had stood across a desk from her 6 years ago and told her the evidence didn't support a criminal investigation. Keep going, Cassian said to her quietly. Not a comfort, a direction. Because the copy was still running and they needed it to finish, and whatever Alara was feeling right now had to wait for 30 more seconds. She kept going. Last time, Salas said. You're not going to fire in here, Cassian said. You need the terminal intact. You need to kill the partition before the copy completes, and you can't do that if the hardware is damaged. He held Salas's gaze. And you can't do that if she's still sitting at it. A beat. So you need her to move, Cassian said, and I'm not going to let that happen. Which means we're going to stand here for about 20 more seconds until she's done, and then we're going to have a different conversation. Salas came forward. Not a lunge. A controlled professional advance, the kind of movement that happened when someone decided that talking was over. He crossed the distance between them with his weapon up, and one of his men moved simultaneously toward Alara. Cassian moved. The exchange was brutal and compact. The weapon went sideways, and his elbow made contact with Salas's face, and the man staggered but did not go down because 20 years of enforcement work built something durable in people. And Salas's return was fast, a knee that connected below Cassian's ribs and drove the air out of him in a way that was immediate and total, the kind of pain that turned off everything except itself for about 2 seconds. 2 seconds was a long time. He heard Harlan. He heard Kovacs. He heard a sound that was furniture and then a sound that was not furniture. He pushed through the 2 seconds with something that was not willpower exactly, but was the thing that lived in people who had been in enough situations like this to know that willpower was the wrong word. It was more like refusal, simple and absolute. The refusal of the body to honor its own limits at the specific moment when honoring them meant dying. Salas had him against a workstation, one forearm across his throat, and was pressing with the specific knowledge of where pressure needed to be most effective. Cassian looked past Salas's shoulder at Alara. She was still at the terminal. The man who had moved toward her was on the floor. Harlan, somewhere in his peripheral vision, had handled that. And her hands were on the keyboard, and her eyes were on the screen, and her jaw was set in a way that was her father's jaw in a photograph, and she hit the final confirmation key and said, "Done." Cassian drove the back of his skull into Salas's face. The arm across his throat loosened. He turned. 2 more impacts, precise and without mercy, and Brent Salas, precinct captain, the man who had stood over a grieving 23-year-old and told her there was nothing to investigate, sat down hard on the floor of the Renner Street dispatch office and did not immediately get up. Cassian straightened. He pulled air into his chest. His ribs reported something he would deal with later. Harlan was there. Kovac was there. 2 of Salas's men were on the floor. The 3rd was gone. He had run, which meant he was going somewhere to report, which meant they had minutes before the 6 men still outside stopped wondering why the building had gone quiet. "The files," Cassian said. "Sent," Alara said. 4 copies to 4 addresses. 1 to your dead drop. 1 to a federal oversight reporter at the Blackwater Chronicle who published my father's last 3 stories. 1 to the federal district attorney's tip system. 1 to a structured data archive that's set to go public in 48 hours if nobody accesses it with a specific cancel key. Cassian looked at her. She stood up from the terminal. She looked at Salas on the floor, who was conscious but finding vertical orientation difficult. She looked at him for a long moment with something in her face that was not satisfaction and was not grief, but was what lived between them when both of them were present simultaneously. "My father built that archive," she said to Salas. "He spent 14 years building it inside your city's own system, and you killed him before he could use it." She paused. Her voice was level, and it cost her nothing to keep it that way because the cost had already been paid a long time ago. "It's out now." Salas looked at her from the floor. His face was blood. His expression had gone somewhere past calculation, somewhere that didn't have a name yet because the situation it was responding to had never existed before. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. "I think I do," she said. Cassian put his hand on her arm, not roughly, a direction, and they moved. Through the northeast exit, into the cold, the freight depot smell and the harbor cold wrapping around them as they came out into the night. The 6 men from the SUVs were moving toward the building's main entrance. They had not yet repositioned to cover the rear. Harlan had a vehicle on the parallel street, 60 meters north, and they moved toward it at a pace that was controlled and fast without being the kind of running that attracted attention from a distance. Cassian's ribs made themselves known with every step, and he managed it the way he managed most physical things, by treating it as information rather than complaint. Alara kept pace beside him. She was breathing hard but evenly. Once she looked back, not at the dispatch office, but at the skyline beyond it, at the city spread wide under its self-made light, enormous and indifferent and full of the machinery of things that had been running for years without accounting. "How long before they know the files are out?" she asked. "They probably know already," Cassian said. "The partition alert would have logged the access. Wren will know within minutes, if he doesn't already. And the federal DA's tip system? Someone will open it tonight if the right person is monitoring, tomorrow morning at the latest." "And the reporter?" "Your father's reporter," Cassian said. "She'll run with it before sunrise." Alara absorbed this. They reached the vehicle. Harlan unlocked it, and they got in. And the city slid past the windows as Harlan drove north, away from Renner Street, away from the burning estate on the promontory, away from the accumulated wreckage of 48 hours that had started with a phone call at 2:13 in the morning. "Ren," Alara said, "he still has his public position. He still has the network. Even with the files out, these things take time. People like him have lawyers and political cover, and—" "Yes," Cassian said. "So what do we do about Wren?" Harlan said from the front seat. "He's at the Meridian Crown Hotel. The Harbor Gala. It's tonight. Annual charity event. The city's entire political class." A pause. "He's been there since 9. There are 400 people in that building." Alara looked at Cassian. Cassian looked out the window. The Meridian Crown was visible from here, its tower rising above the harbor district,
its upper floors lit with the particular warm light of an expensive event proceeding exactly as planned while the ground shifted underneath it. He thought about Wren in that room, surrounded by the apparatus of his own respectability, the bought allegiances and the cultivated appearances, the donors and the officials and the architecture of influence that had been constructed around a core of deliberate destruction. He thought about the witnesses on the hit list who were still alive tonight but might not be tomorrow. He thought about the reporter who would be opening an email in a few hours. He thought about the federal DA's tip system logging an anonymous submission. He thought about the 400 people in that building who had no idea what was underneath the evening they were having. He thought about Decker.
He looked at Alara, who was watching him with the steadiness she brought to everything, and the particular quality of someone who had already decided what she thought needed to happen, and was waiting to find out if the man across from her had arrived at the same place. "We need to end this tonight," she said. "Not in a courtroom in 6 months. Tonight. Because by tomorrow morning, Wren will know how much is out, and he will run or he will destroy whatever he can't move, and the people on that hit list will have—" "I know," Cassian said. "Then say it." He looked at her. The vehicle moved through Blackwater City, through the nighttime streets, toward the tower above the harbor, where a man who had been running a machine of corruption for 14 years was standing in a ballroom beneath chandeliers drinking someone's money. "We go in," Cassian said. Alara breathed out. 400 civilians, Harlan said. "We keep them out of it," Cassian said. "The files are already out. They have 48 hours before the public archive drops. What we need is Wren himself, his public exposure, in front of enough witnesses that there's no version of this he walks away from." He paused. He's been careful his entire career. He's never been in a room where he couldn't control the information. Another pause. "We change that tonight." Harlan was quiet for a moment. He drove. He said, 4 of us against whatever Wren has in that building. His security team, 4, maybe 6. And Salas will have called ahead. "Yes." Another silence. Harlan drove. "Decker would have said yes," Harlan said. Cassian didn't answer that. He looked out the window at the Meridian Crown growing closer, its lights burning above the harbor, its tower full of people who thought tonight was a charity gala and were about to discover what the city they lived in had actually been built on. Alara checked her weapon. She did it without ceremony, the way her father had probably taught her. In whatever room of whatever apartment, in whatever year of her childhood, he had decided that knowing how was a necessary skill in a city like this. Cassian looked at her hands, at the steadiness in them. "When we're inside," he said, "you stay close." "I know," she said. "If it goes wrong, say—" "It won't," she said. Not because she was certain, because she had decided. The vehicle stopped at the corner of Harbor Boulevard and Crown Street, the Meridian Crown's facade rising above them, its entrance lit with the gold-warm light of a well-funded evening, men in suits moving past the doors, the distant sound of a string ensemble drifting from somewhere inside. Cassian looked at it for a moment. Then he opened the door and got out into the cold, and the harbor wind came off the water and hit him full in the face. And above him the Meridian Crown blazed against the night sky, while somewhere inside it, Gideon Wren stood in a room full of his own. The lobby of the Meridian Crown was all marble and light. Gold fixtures, high ceilings that cost more per square foot than the average Blackwater resident made in a year. A coat check running at capacity, a bar doing serious business, and the murmur of 400 people who had paid to be seen in this room, moving through it with the practiced ease of people who had been performing ease their whole lives. Cassian walked through the front entrance like he belonged there, because in Blackwater City, in a room full of money and political proximity, looking like you belonged there was 60% of the work. His jacket was wrong for the occasion, dark, functional, nothing like the suits around him. But his face did what it always did, which was project the specific quality of a man who had never needed a room's permission to be in it. Alara was beside him. Harlan was 20 feet back. Kovich had taken the service entrance. They had 4 minutes before Salas, wherever he was, managed to communicate their direction to anyone inside. Possibly less. The ballroom was through the double doors at the end of the main corridor, and Cassian could hear it before he reached it. The particular acoustic texture of a large formal event, music beneath conversation, beneath the sound of crystal and cutlery, and the self-congratulation of people who had successfully converted proximity to power into the appearance of having earned it. He pushed through the doors. The room was enormous. Chandeliers the size of small vehicles hung from a ceiling that had been designed to make the people beneath it feel significant, which was a lie the architecture told very well. Round tables arranged across a floor that was large enough to feel like the outdoors. A stage at the far end with a podium and a projected logo for the Blackwater Community Foundation, which was the event's nominal purpose, charity, the kind that came with tax advantages and canapés. And there, at the center table closest to the stage, surrounded by the particular constellation of staffers and officials that formed around men who had successfully converted political influence into something that required protecting, Councilman Gideon Wren. Cassian had seen photographs. The photographs had done an accurate job. Early 60s, silver-haired, with the physical presence of a man who had understood early that appearing trustworthy was a skill that could be developed. He was talking to the man on his left with the attentive, practiced warmth of someone who had been performing listening for decades. He saw Cassian the same moment Cassian saw him. The warmth didn't leave his face. It was too good a face for that, too trained. But something behind his eyes shifted, the way light shifted when a cloud moved across it, and his right hand moved slightly toward the man on his right, which was his security lead, who had also seen Cassian by now and was already coming to his feet. Cassian kept walking. The room was noticing. Not all of it, not yet, but the ripple of attention that happened when something happened that wasn't on the evening's program was beginning to move outward from the center table. Heads turning, conversations losing their thread. Wren stood up. He stood up because sitting would have meant waiting, and men like Wren had survived by being the one who set the terms of every encounter. He stood, and he buttoned his jacket with one practiced gesture, and he looked at Cassian across the 10 feet remaining between them with the expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and had always come out of them functional. "Mr. Vale," he said. Conversational, almost warm. The voice of a man who understood that the performance didn't stop just because the audience had changed. "This is unexpected." "I doubt that," Cassian said. A beat. Around them, the room had gone to a different kind of quiet. Not silence, but the specific quality of 400 people recalibrating what they were witnessing. Wren's security lead was on his feet and moving. Cassian looked at him once and said quietly, "Don't." Something in the way he said it, the absence of threat in it, the simple fact of it, made the man pause, which was a second's worth of pause, but that was what was needed. Harlan was behind the security lead before he could resume moving. It happened without sound. Wren looked at his security lead. He looked back at Cassian. The warmth in his face had not left, but it had changed quality. It was thinner now, covering something colder underneath, the way ice covered water. "Whatever you think you're doing," Wren began. "The files are out," Cassian said. 3 words. He said them at normal volume, not performing for the room, just saying them in Gideon Wren's direction, and they landed the way 3 words could land when they were the right 3 words in the right order. Wren went completely still. "Federal DA's office received a data submission approximately 40 minutes ago," Cassian continued. "The Blackwater Chronicle's investigative desk received the same submission. There is a public archive set to open in 47 hours, containing 14 years of financial records, communication logs, wire transfer documentation, and source testimony connecting your infrastructure contracting network to organized crime, money laundering through city emergency services billing, and the ordered killing of investigative journalist Daniel Quinn." He paused. "Among other things." The room was very quiet now. Not performance quiet, actually quiet, the way rooms went quiet when something real was happening in them. Wren's face had done something that his training couldn't entirely contain, a contraction around the eyes, a slight whitening at the corners of his mouth. He was doing the math, and the math was not resolving in his favor, and some part of his body knew it even while his mind was still looking for the exit. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said. The warmth was gone. What was left was colder and more honest. "I know your name on a financial routing sequence that connects to the Emergency Services Billing Authority," Cassian said. I know your staff terminal ran a query on Alara Quinn's name 48 hours ago. I know Brent Salas has been running interference for your operation inside the police department for at least 8 years, including the investigation into Daniel Quinn's death. He held Wren's gaze. And I know that 3 hours ago you sent 8 men to my property with military-grade ordnance. You can't prove— I don't need to prove it tonight, Cassian said. The federal DA's office does. And they have 14 years of documentation built by a journalist who spent his career making sure that when it finally came out, it would be unburiable. A pause. It's out. Something happened in Wren's face. The last of the performance fell away, not all at once but progressively, the way a facade fell when the structure behind it gave out, piece by piece, the expensive maintained surface of a man who had operated carefully and successfully for a very long time, revealing the thing underneath it, which was smaller and more frightened, and much uglier than the surface had suggested. He looked past Cassian. He looked at Alara. She was standing slightly behind and to the left of Cassian, and she had been still since they entered the room. And she was looking at Gideon Wren with the particular expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific moment for 6 years and had arrived at it and found it was not what they had expected, which was never what people expected, which was what it was. Your father, Wren said. He said it as if the name was information he was processing rather than a human being he had ordered killed, as if she was a variable in a calculation. Don't, she said. Quiet. Absolute. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not remorse, nothing that clean. More like the recognition of a fact. An acknowledgement the way a ledger acknowledged a number. Then he ran. Not away from her, not toward the doors. Sideways, toward the stage, which told Cassian something about where his contingency was located. And he was moving before the thought finished, cutting across the ballroom floor between tables, while behind him the room finally broke into the kind of noise 400 people made when they understood that what was happening was real. Wren hit the stage stairs and went up them, and the door to the left of the stage, the one that led to the hotel's upper floor service corridors, was already opening from the inside. Someone on his staff who had been staged there, waiting for exactly this, because Wren had been careful his entire career, and tonight was not the night he stopped. Cassian went up the stage stairs 4 seconds behind him. He heard Alara behind him and did not tell her to stop because there was no version of tonight where she stayed in the ballroom while this finished. The service corridor was bare concrete and fluorescent light, the Meridian Crown's operational spine hidden behind its decorative face. Wren was 30 feet ahead, moving faster than a 60-year-old man in a formal suit had any right to move, fueled by the specific energy of a person who understood that this was not recoverable and that what was at stake now was not reputation or office, but something more fundamental. The man who had come out of the stage door, a thick-shouldered figure in a staff jacket who was not staff, stepped into Cassian's path and led with his elbow, and Cassian took it across the shoulder rather than the face, which was the difference between stumbling and going down. And he stumbled, hit the corridor wall with his damaged ribs, and the pain was white and total. And he pushed through it because the alternative to pushing through it was the floor, and the floor was not an option. The man came again. Cassian let him close the distance and then made it cost him. 2 precise exchanges that ended with the man against the opposite wall and then on the floor of the corridor, and the whole thing took 9 seconds and left Cassian's side reporting damage that he was going to have to address eventually. He kept moving. Alara was still with him. She had gone around the man on the floor without breaking stride and was matching Cassian's pace with her jaw set and her eyes forward. The corridor ended at a stairwell. The door was swinging shut. They went through it and up, and the stairwell went 2 floors before it opened onto a wider corridor that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air, the hotel's upper residential level. Emergency lighting only up here, the building's main power not extending to unoccupied guest floors after midnight. Wren was at the end of the corridor. He had stopped at a set of double doors that opened onto, Cassian recognized the architectural position, the roof terrace. The Meridian Crown's rooftop was a feature, accessible for private events, with a helipad at the north end that the hotel maintained for a small clientele who arrived and departed without wanting to be seen at ground level. Wren had the doors open and was through them and into the rain, which had started somewhere in the last hour. The same rain that had started all of this, heavy and cold and indifferent to whatever human urgency was moving through it. Cassian came through the doors. The rooftop terrace was a wide expanse of treated concrete and planters that had been designed for summer evenings and were not designed for this. Rain hammered everything flat. The harbor spread below on three sides. The city's light reflected upward through the downpour, turning the low clouds amber and white and giving the darkness above the rooftop a strange, suffused luminescence. Wren was at the edge of the helipad, which was lit by its own low-perimeter lighting, the H painted in white, now rain-slicked and shining. He had stopped because there was nowhere further to go. The helipad ended at a safety railing, and below the railing was the drop to the street, 40 floors of glass and steel, the harbor traffic far below looking like moving lights through smeared glass. He turned when he heard Cassian come through the doors. His face was wet. His silver hair was flat against his head. The expensive suit was doing what expensive suits did in the rain, which was become expensive wet fabric, and the man wearing it was breathing hard and looked, for the first time in however many years he had been building this, like exactly what he was, a man who had run out of room. Cassian walked toward him. He kept his weapon at his side. He walked at the pace of someone who was not in a hurry because there was nowhere for the conversation to go except where it was going. Elara came through the doors behind him and stopped. Rain soaked into everything. The harbor roared faintly in the distance, indifferent and enormous. "It's over," Cassian said. Wren looked at him. He was doing the thing people did when the options had run out, but the mind hadn't accepted it yet, running the inventory one more time, looking for the exit that wasn't there. "You think this ends things," Wren said. "You think your files and your evidence and your—" He gestured at the rain, at the rooftop, at the city below. "You have no idea how deep this goes. You and the girl and your documentation. You've scratched the surface. The people above me will have their turn," Cassian said. "Tonight is yours." "You're going to kill me," Wren said. Not a question. He said it with a specific flatness that was almost acceptance. "I'm going to give you to the federal investigators who are currently being briefed from a 14-year archive that your own operation was too arrogant to know existed," Cassian said. "What happens to you after that is their business." Something in Wren's face moved. He had expected death. Death was, in a certain accounting, cleaner. Death had no discovery process, no public record, no daily reckoning. Death was something that could be managed by the people above him, retrospectively, as a narrative. Federal investigation was not clean. "You don't get it," Wren said, and his voice had dropped, had lost the performance quality entirely, had become just a voice, tired and exposed and carrying something that had been carried for a long time. "I didn't build this. I inherited it. It was already running when I came into office. The contracts, the network, the arrangements, they were already in place. I made the choice to use what was there." "And Daniel Quinn," Elara said. She had come forward. She was standing beside Cassian now, rain-soaked, her dark hair flat against her face, the bruising around her eye the color of a sky before a worse storm. Wren looked at her. "He was going to publish," Wren said. "If he had published, he was going to tell the truth," Elara said, "about what this city was doing with its own money and its own people. That's all he was doing." "It would have dismantled—" "I know what it would have done," she said. "I know exactly what it would have done, because I've spent 48 hours reading everything he built, and it would have done what it's going to do now, 6 years later, except he would have been alive to see it." Her voice was not raised. It was the most controlled she had sounded since the kitchen floor. "And I would have had more time with him." The rain came down between them. Wren looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing something that was not quite recognizable. Not guilt, which would have been too simple, but something adjacent to the acknowledgement of a cost. A recognition that the ledger had a side he had not been looking at. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be worse than silence, and somewhere in the wreckage of the evening he had found that much clarity. A door opened behind them. Not the terrace door. A stairwell access on the far side of the helipad. 2 men came through it, and Cassian turned and then stopped, because the two men had federal credentials extended in front of them like physical evidence of everything that had been set in motion tonight. Harlan had made calls. Harlan always made calls. In the chaos of the ballroom, while Cassian was in the corridor with his ribs and the stairwell and the rain, Harlan had made the calls that needed to be made to the people who had been waiting, at the federal level, away from Blackwater's local apparatus, away from Salas's reach, for something solid enough to move on. The files had been solid enough. The two federal agents crossed the helipad in the rain, and one of them told Gideon Wren, in the standard language of such moments, that he was being detained pending federal investigation, and Wren put his hands out in front of him with the specific quality of a man who had finally stopped running the calculation because the answer was always the same. Cassian stepped back. He let them work. He stood at the edge of the helipad and looked at the harbor below, and the rain hit the back of his neck and ran under his collar, and he was very tired in the way that went deeper than the body, the kind of tired that lived in the part of you that had been carrying something for a long time. Alara stood beside him, not close enough to touch, just beside him, the way she had been beside him since the boat, since the water, since the city's nighttime machinery had stopped being the backdrop and started being the thing itself. She watched them take Wren to the stairwell door. She watched until the door closed and he was gone. Then she looked at the harbor. "Salas," she said. "Federal jurisdiction now," Cassian said. "He'll run, but they'll find him. He can't disappear the way Wren can. He's too visible, too much paper attached to him." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. The rain eased slightly, the way it sometimes eased without stopping, a reduction in intensity rather than an end. "The witnesses," she said. "The people on the hit list." Harlan flagged them all tonight. Federal protection requests are already moving. He paused. The ones who are still reachable are being reached. She took that in. She processed it with the systematic thoroughness she brought to everything. "Marcus fell," she said. He'll testify. He's already agreed." Another silence. Longer this time. "The reporter," she said. "My father's reporter. She'll run the story." "She'll run everything," Cassian said. 14 years of it. It will take months to fully publish. It will be the longest story she's ever written." Alara looked at the harbor. Below them, Blackwater City ran its nighttime operations, its lights multiplied and fractured by the rain, its ordinary machinery continuing because cities continued regardless, the dispatch centers processing calls, the port moving freight, the streets carrying the people who had nothing to do with any of what had happened tonight and would wake up tomorrow and read about it in the way people read about the city they lived in, from a distance, with the sense that it happened in a different city than the one they inhabited. "He would have wanted to see it," she said. "My father." There was nothing to add to that. Cassian didn't try. She breathed in slowly, then out. The rain touched her face and she didn't wipe it away. "You're going to disappear," she said. Not accusatory, observational. "After this. Whatever the federal investigation does, you're not part of it. You'll step back and let it move without you, and nobody will be able to put you in this building tonight or on that boat or in the Renner Street dispatch office." "That's the general idea," he said. "And your operation. Parts of it will continue, other parts won't." He paused. "Some things can't continue the same way after certain nights." She looked at him. The harbor light from below reached her face and made something of the bruising and the rain and the 2 days she was carrying in the lines around her eyes. "Your sister," she said. "You should tell her." He was quiet. "About my father," she said. "She should know what he did. Not what happened to him. She doesn't need that. But that he existed and that he was who he was." She paused. "He would have wanted someone to know." Cassian looked at the harbor. He thought about his sister in a city that wasn't this one, with a name that wasn't her original one, with a family she had built in the space that Daniel Quinn had helped create for her. He thought about what it meant to carry a debt for 8 years and find the shape of it in someone you hadn't known to look for. "I'll tell her," he said. The rain was easing further, not stopping, but becoming the kind of rain that was more memory than event. Below them, the helipad lights ran in a steady perimeter, illuminating nothing now.
The helicopter that Wren had presumably been counting on not arriving because whoever was supposed to send it had received other information tonight and made other calculations.
"Where do you go now?" Alara asked. It was the question he hadn't been answering for himself yet. The estate was gone. The parts of his operation that Wren had touched were compromised and needed to be dismantled or rebuilt from nothing. He had 4 trusted people remaining, and one of them had 20 years of accumulated knowledge, and none of them had a stable base. "Away from here first," he said. "The rest comes after." She recognized the words. He had said them on the water. She didn't smile. The split lip was still healing, and besides, it wasn't a smiling moment. But something in her face acknowledged it. "I have to go back," she said. "To dispatch. To my life." She said it with the particular tone of someone assessing what that meant, what was still there when you came back to a thing after something like this. "My supervisor thinks I have a family emergency, which is not entirely inaccurate." "You'll be called to testify," Cassian said. "At some point. Federal process." "I know." "They'll protect you until then." "I know," she said again. She paused. "I'm not afraid of testifying. I have a very good memory." She said it without emphasis, as a plain statement of a plain fact, and it contained everything that plain fact had meant over the last 48 hours. They stood for a moment longer on the rain-slicked rooftop of the Meridian Crown Hotel while the city moved underneath them. Then Cassian said, "Your father was a remarkable man." She looked at him. Something moved through her face, slow and complete, the way weather moved through an open landscape. Nothing held back, nothing performed. "I know," she said. And then, quietly, "Thank you for looking for him." He held her gaze. He thought about what looking for someone meant when you never found them in time, and what it meant to find them in a form you hadn't expected, through a daughter who had inherited the quality that had made him worth looking for in the first place. "He found me," Cassian said. "He found me a long time ago. He just didn't know it." She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at the harbor one more time, at the water that received everything the city shed into it, rain and light and all the weight of what people did to each other and called civilization. And something in her posture changed, not loosened exactly, more like something was set down. The particular shift of a body after it has been carrying something for a very long time and has finally placed it somewhere permanent. She turned from the railing. Cassian turned with her. They went back through the terrace doors and into the dry corridor and down through the building's back passages, past the evidence of an evening that had become something other than what it was advertised as, through the service exit into the cold street where Harlan was waiting with a vehicle, and the city was still running its indifferent machinery all around them. 3 weeks later, the first stories broke. The Blackwater Chronicle ran them across 4 days, a series built from the archive that Daniel Quinn had spent 14 years constructing inside a billing system nobody had thought to look in. The reporter who had published his last 3 stories wrote them with the specificity of someone who understood that the best tribute to a source was accuracy, and she was accurate, and the accuracy was devastating. Councilman Gideon Wren was formally indicted on 43 counts, including racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and complicity in 2 deaths. His lawyers entered pleas that the federal prosecutors appeared to find instructive rather than persuasive. The trial date was set. Brent Salas was arrested in a hotel room in a city 400 miles from Blackwater, apparently having run with the deliberateness of a man who had always known running might be necessary and had made contingencies that turned out not to be contingent enough. He was extradited. He was indicted separately. The charges included the original obstruction of the Daniel Quinn investigation, which had been reclassified as something more significant. Tomas Breck was arrested in connection with the witness compromise. Novak Castle's operation was dismantled over 6 weeks by federal agents who had, apparently, been waiting for a thread solid enough to pull. When they pulled it, a significant portion of Blackwater's underground casino infrastructure came apart in a way that would take years to fully document. Davi Wren was found in a suburban apartment 2 states away, which was further than most people expected and not far enough. He cooperated. His cooperation was noted, and his sentencing would reflect it, which was the kind of outcome that was neither satisfying nor surprising. The federal witness protection and oversight processes absorbed the names from the hit list and accounted for everyone who was still living. Some of them testified. All of them survived long enough to testify, which was the important thing. Marcus Fell testified for 3 days. He was thorough, patient, and precise in the way of a man who had spent 8 weeks in a room with nothing to do but remember things and had used the time well. His testimony connected 2 decades of financial irregularity to the names that the archive named, and by the end of the 3rd day, the federal courtroom had the quality of a room in which something was being completed. The autumn came to Blackwater City the way autumn came, incrementally, reluctantly, the heat giving up a little more each week until one morning you woke up and the harbor had a different color, and the sky had a different weight, and the city looked briefly like a place that was beginning something rather than ending it. Alara Quinn went back to dispatch. She went back because it was her work, and she was good at it, and because the part of her that had learned to listen to voices in trouble and route help toward them had not been altered by what she had been through. It had been, if anything, confirmed. She knew more now about what the city was underneath its presentation, about the machinery that ran through its official structures, and the things that had been running through that machinery, and that knowledge sat in her differently than most knowledge sat in most people. It didn't make her harder, it made her more exact. Her supervisor asked no questions about the family emergency. The bruising had faded. The lip had healed. She sat in her chair at her station and put on her headset, and the city came through the line the way it always came through, call by call. Each one its own small emergency, its own particular human moment at the edge of something. And she handled each one with the same careful attention she had always given them and always would. Some evenings she took the long route home, along the harbor walk, where the water ran steel gray in the autumn light, and the meridian crown was visible in the middle distance, its tower rising above the other towers, its rooftop helipad a small mark against the sky. She looked at it sometimes and didn't think about any one particular thing. Just looked. The way you looked at places where something had happened and felt the weight of having been there. Her father's archive was part of the public record now. She had read all of it, in the evenings over 2 weeks, at her kitchen table with tea that went cold because she kept forgetting to drink it. She read it the way you read something that someone you loved had made, looking not just at what it said, but at the person making it, at the choices and the shapes and the 14 years of patience. He had been afraid. She could see it in the way he organized certain sections, the careful distance he maintained from the most dangerous names, the way he backed things up 3 times and embedded them in systems that weren't his own. He had been afraid, and he had kept going anyway, which was not the same as bravery, but was something more complicated and more real. She had a green USB drive on her kitchen windowsill, not her father's. That one was gone. She had bought a new one, the same color, and had put it on the windowsill as a thing that was not a memorial exactly, more like an acknowledgement, a way of saying, I know what this cost. I know what it was worth. On an evening in late October, she got a letter. No return address. Postmarked from a city she didn't recognize. Inside, 1 page, handwritten in a script that was spare and economical, the way the writer approached most things. It said, My sister knows. She wanted you to know that she thinks about what your father did every day. She has for 20 years. Some debts are too large to repay and too important to stop trying. It was not signed. It didn't need to be. She read it twice. She folded it carefully and put it on the windowsill next to the green drive, and stood for a moment looking at both of them, the last light of the October evening coming through the glass and laying itself across the sill and the 2 small objects on it, making them both glow faintly amber in the way ordinary things glowed when the light was exactly right. She thought about a man sitting alone in a penthouse office at 2 a.m. reviewing ledgers when a phone rang, and the 6 words that had moved him when nothing else had, and everything that had come from those 6 words and that movement. She thought about what it meant that the most feared man in Blackwater City had carried a debt for 8 years to a man who had never asked him to. She thought about what it meant that he had answered. She thought, some people are more than what they've built around themselves. Some people are most themselves in the thing they do that nobody sees. Outside her window, Blackwater City ran its evening operations. The harbor lights were coming on in sequence as the dark came in from the water, one after another, small illuminations against the large darkness, the way lights had always come on in this city at the end of a day. The dispatch center 3 miles away was taking calls. Emergency services were moving through the streets. The official machinery and the unofficial machinery were both running as they always ran, and the distance between them was what it always was. Vast in theory, intimate in practice, the city's real life happening in the space where the two kinds of machinery touched. It was, Alara Quinn thought, still her city. She had always known it was broken in specific ways that mattered. She knew now more precisely which ways and why and at what cost, and she knew the names of the people who had decided the brokenness was useful to them and the names of the people who had spent their lives insisting it didn't have to be that way. Her father's name was among the latter. So she thought, in the specific and limited and human way that people could be said to be anything at all, was Cassian Vales. She turned from the window. The green drive caught the last of the light and held it for a moment. Then the evening completed itself, and the room went to its ordinary dark, and Alara reached for the lamp switch, and the light came on, and the city outside the glass continued in all its damaged, unfinished, necessary life. The harbor received the last of the day's rain and held it in its cold, indifferent immensity, carrying everything the city gave it out toward the open water, toward the place where the darkness had no edge, the place where everything the city shed eventually arrived and was finally, silently let go.